It's time for Fantasy Football Today for CBS Local Sports. I'm Jamie Eisenberg. That's Dave Richard. We have your starts and sits for week number 10. And let's start with the quarterback position. Our start of the week on CBS Sports is Jared Goff. Looking at his matchup against Houston, it is fantastic. And he has been fantastic of late, at least 20 or more fantasy points in 4 of his last 6 games, coming off a monster game against the Giants. I think he carries it over for another monster game this week in week 10. And the guy you want to start Goff over is easy, and that's Kirk Cousins. He has been struggling of late, 19 fantasy points or less in each of his last 2 games. You know about the injuries that he's dealt with on the offensive line, and a tough matchup against Minnesota this week. Easy to sit Kirk Cousins.
We are expecting Matt Forte to not play for the New York Jets, which opens the door for Bilal Powell to get a big opportunity, a big workload, and he's got a phenomenal matchup against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Over the last 4 weeks, this Bucs run defense has allowed 6 rushing touchdowns, 4.5 yards per carry, but it's what they've done in the last 2 weeks against running backs, catching passes out of the backfield, that really gets my attention. 10.5 yards per grab, 1 touchdown in that span. Powell's going to get a lot of work. On the other side of the ball in that game is Doug Martin, and I'm worried about the workload for him. The last 2 games before Week 9, he had 7 fantasy points, and that was with 18-plus carries. Last week, he only had 8 carries. He didn't even get you a single fantasy point. I'm not sure how much he's going to play, and the matchup isn't even that good for him. The Jets' run defense has really come around over the past couple of weeks. They've shut down Jay Ajayi, LaShawn McCoy, a host of others. Doug Martin scares me. I would set him.
Tough matchup for Doug Martin, but great matchup for his teammate in DeSean Jackson. Mike Evans not going to play because of the suspension, and Jackson should get a ton of targets from Ryan Fitzpatrick, who has a tendency to feature his #1 guy, and he should lean on Jackson this week in a great matchup because the Jets have allowed 6 receivers to score or gain 90 receiving yards in the past 4 games. So Jackson's in line for one of his best games of the season, a potential top 15 fantasy wide receiver in any format this week, and he should be 100 times better than T.Y. Hilton this week because T.Y. Hilton, as we've seen throughout the course of the season, good matchup, you start him. Bad matchup, you avoid him. That has a lot to do with his quarterback situation with no Andrew Luck, and this matchup is awful. The Steelers allowing the second fewest fantasy points to opposing wide receivers, and they will focus on taking T.Y. Hilton out of the game. You saw what he did last week in a favorable matchup against the Texans. Do not chase points. He will struggle this week.
Kyle Rudolph isn't a very exciting tight end to use in fantasy play, but you know what? He's getting a lot of action from Case Keenum. Certainly a lot of catches, at least 5 in each of his last 4 games. And he's got a nice matchup this week against Washington. They've allowed 4 touchdowns, 2 tight ends on the year, 2 in their last 3 games, and 13 yards per catch. So do the math. If he's going to get 5 catches, he's going to average 13 or more yards per catch. That's going to make for a decent stat line for a tight end in fantasy. I would use Kyle Rudolph. I would not use Jason Witten. You know that the Dallas Cowboys, they're going to be without Ezekiel Elliott. You're going to see Alfred Morris in that backfield. They're also going to be without Tyron Smith at left tackle, and that means more blocking for Witten to help out their backup left tackle, and it means fewer targets for him, and he hasn't been as involved in the offense anyway. So I think Jason Witten, PPR leagues, standard leagues, going to let you down in Week 10.
Those have been your starts and sits for week number 10. This is Fantasy Football Today for CBS Local Sports. Good luck in your fantasy match.